Thank you for joining us for this event.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, a quick intro, Jean, you are VP of Engineering at Range, and you also write a popular newsletter called Tech and Tea, where I would say you investigate themes at the intersection of management, personal space, parenting, and more. I don't know if this definition works for you or resonates with you.
Yeah, I think so. I think I see a lot of content that's very like great content, like your content that's very much around the career. And for me, I wanted to explore like the navigating life with all the aspects of life with
Yeah.
having a career in tech. So that's a focus of my writing.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been reading your writings for a long time, and we've actually known each other for quite some time. And one of the things that I like about your writing is that you address these themes from two angles. One, sometimes from a team perspective, so like creating a healthy work culture, how to work well together, and other times from a more personal perspective, personal takes, like carving out space for yourself, creating sustainable work ethics for yourself. And I think you've been writing about these things for a long time, but it feels like this is more relevant than ever. As in recent times, my feeling is that there there is a big divide between people who are more like hustlers. They believe in intensity, all in the same room, working over the weekends, long hours, etc., and people who are more and companies who are more, I would say, calm. I don't know what's the right word for it. It's more about asynchronous, thoughtful work, incremental
Mhm.
work, balanced. And this is like a divide in the tech culture right now. I'm thinking of Elon and Twitter drama versus
Mhm.
companies like Doist or Zapier, GitLab that take a very different approach. So I think you're like in a privileged position to comment on that because on one side you're in a leadership position in a startup, so in an environment where that naturally maybe lends to working long hours,
Mhm.
stressful times sometimes. But you're also a parent. You have been in this industry for many years, so you've definitely reflected and thought about these kind of themes for a long time. So very broad question. Then we take it from there. What's
Mhm.
your take about this whole debate of
The
between
divide.
hustling culture, yes, more
Yeah.
calm culture.
It is a bit, especially I think if you think back to a year and a half ago, it felt like the leverage was in employees' hands, right? Like candidates. I feel like companies were really trying very hard to make their employees happy, working on team building, culture, offering remote work and flexibility. And I would say it is somewhat discouraging now to see with it feels like the tech industry is like contracting and there's yeah, with Elon's kind of model, I guess to me it feels obviously like I would never want to work at a company like that, but for other leaders to see that and say, yeah, let's lay off a bunch of our engineers, cut out management, and just expect more of everyone, have them work super long hours. It feels sad, but in some ways, I feel like there is a more stark contrast between companies that are valuing one thing versus the other. And so, in a way, I think it is a little bit easier for candidates to figure out like which is a better fit,
Yeah,
if that makes sense. And I
yeah,
hope that there continues to be a divide rather than a shift towards the more like, yeah, long hours and weekends. And of course, some people like to do that. Like I've worked at startups where I wanted to do that, but rather than the expectation is that everyone does that.
yeah. So you think this is also in part like market driven? So the downturn gives maybe less leverage to candidates and
I
employees, and
think so.
because manage if it was for managers and executives, they would be leaning more towards a culture of co-located people all working all the same place. You feel the benefits of asynchronous work, maybe remote work, is more felt by regular engineers, let's say, than leadership in general.
I would say maybe not at startups, depending on where your startups, the kind of the history of your startup founders, but I would say at larger companies, right? Like especially in SF or like cities where it is super expensive to live close to where
Mm,
offices are, like executives are the ones who can afford to be like, yeah, let's have an office. It's a 15-minute walk from my massive house. Whereas, yeah, like in SF, like people are commuting like 45 minutes, an hour away. And that's, yeah, it's 2 hours a day that they're commuting. Whereas, yeah, and of course, I think executives, if they are seeing people in person, there's a little bit, that's how people have managed over the past few decades. And so it's a big shift for people to learn how to manage effectively and run teams effectively when they don't see everyone. I think it's just like a shift to low. It's having to shift to a more like high trust
Yeah.
environment where you trust that people are getting what they say they're getting done rather than just looking busy and like they're physically there in the office.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And do you think this debate is going to settle in one direction or the other one eventually, or do you think there will always be different types of companies, maybe based on their scale or product maturity or culture in general? So there will be remote companies, asynchronous first companies on one side, and I don't know,
Mhm.
synchronous companies, office based companies, like forever.
I'm hoping that they'll continue to be both. Like, I feel that a lot of engineering talent has spread out, right? Not just in the like major cities
Yeah.
anymore. So I feel like if people want to work with those people, you have to meet them where they are. Yeah, it feels like a big shift from pre-pandemic where it was like just a handful, like automatic, like the bigger companies like Automatic. I feel like Buffer, just like a handful of like companies. You're like, oh, these are the companies if you want to do fully remote work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now it feels like there's a lot more optionality.
Yeah.
I definitely hope that continues. I think it will. I think there's a lot of, I don't know if you want to speak to what executives care about. I guess there's also a lot of cost savings to not having
Yeah.
like real estate in like major cities.
Yeah, no, definitely. There, especially in major cities, this is a relevant factor. Do you think productivity-wise, things change on one mode or the other one, or if you implement, let's say, things, you can be equally productive in one way or the other?
Yeah, I think so. For me personally, I feel like it's not just, I'm sure you know this, but for engineers, it's not hours worked. It's like,
Absolutely.
right, how much sleep you're getting, how you're feeling, like what, like how clear the strategy is, right? It's like all these things that go into it. And if you have clarity and you're feeling motivated and you have a set of work that excites you, you could easily be, people talk about 10x engineers, but I think any engineer could be 10x more productive than they are in a low motivation depleted state. And so that's why I feel really strongly like with the engineers I work with, I encourage them to take time off, especially like parents and people who like, if they have a lot of personal stuff going on, not, oh, how are you going to satisfy your work requirements? It's, no, go take time off because you need to be like nourished. You need to be feeling
Yeah,
okay to come to work and do work and be productive. It's not just, we're not just like putting things on a gadget like in a factory anymore. It's just like
absolutely.
creative work.
Yeah, it's like knowledge work really, it doesn't work by the hours. One of the things that surprised me the most when I started the newsletter as a side gig and was doing this maybe
Mm.
1 hour and a half a day. And when I moved to do this full time, I thought, okay, now I have a full day for writing, right? So my productivity would be like at least three times, four times what I produce. It's not like that because
Mm-mm.
not all tasks are equal. So
Right.
writing, for example, for me is very demanding, and so even if I wanted, I wouldn't be able to write for more than maybe 3 hours a day or even
Right.
less than that. So I think sometimes we forget that we cannot just count the hours and assume that people are productive the same way throughout the whole day, throughout all the days of the week, especially engineers. So yes, I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah. I think there's, of course, even remote first, and Automatic has really, they were doing this for many years
Yeah,
pre-pandemic, and they've really nailed the, okay, everyone's remote, but then we get together for these meetups. And I do think like those in-person touch points are important, right? Like doing that kind of like team building, the more casual socialization that you wouldn't do over Zoom. I think those things are really important. But I think in terms of just like work output, remote can be really good if it works for people, right? Like people have options to like yeah, pick their kids up and then get back online later. Whereas like in an office, it's like they're probably just putting their work down and going home.
Yeah, yeah, because I think there is this fallacy that some people believe that, okay, even the believers in remote work, sometimes many of them think, okay, but if you are in the office together with people all the time, you actually may produce more, but you eventually crash and burn, or maybe you got stressed. While remote work and this other type of work, it's just more sustained in the long run. Well, I actually think it's not exactly like that. You can actually be as much as productive, if not more productive, because you work the hours that are most convenient to you. You
Mhm.
work maybe in a more quiet environment as a remote worker or a synchronous worker. I don't know how to call them, but rather than in an office. Of course, it depends on the situations, but I don't only think that this is better because it's more healthy for your rest. I think it can be more productive i- as a whole.
Yeah. I think there are some things that you have to be really intentional about
Mm,
because they come not for free, but you can fill them in with the in-person office. But for example, making it clear when people should ask for help, right? Like I think in an office, you might have a stand up, people have to get in by whatever, 9 a.m., 10 a.m. You have the stand up, someone's, oh, I'm stuck on this thing, someone goes and helps them. Like in a remote environment, it feels like there's a much higher barrier to ping someone and say, "Hey, can you jump on a call with me for 5 minutes and take
yeah,
a look at this thing I'm working on?" So I do think you have to create some norms and you have to be very intentional about some things like that. And especially for more junior engineers, they
yeah,
get a lot out of that. The default kind of in person, someone just turns around, hey, looks like you've been stuck at your screen. You've still been stuck on that for
yeah,
an app.
yeah,
Might help you.
yeah,
I think support for new grads or early career engineers like is something that companies do need to pay close attention to. But like a lot of the stuff that I feel like is harder remote because you get some of it for free,
yeah.
they were in-person problems as well. It's just like when you solve them intentionally for remote teams, like it's a much more inclusive and like thoughtful solution.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. For my experience has been my startup started as co-located in an office. Then we
Mhm.
leave the transition during COVID to fully remote team. And I have to say, I was working with people I have had known for many years, and I didn't feel much difference. And I thought it's this thing is fantastic. Everything works just the same. So the future of work is just 100% remote for everybody, etc. Then I moved to another company because we sold our
Mm.
startup, and it was also during the pandemic. Anyway, it was 100% remote, and I joined this company where I didn't know anybody, or yeah, I knew some people, but few of them, and
Yeah.
it felt completely different. I
Yeah.
didn't have like you said, the familiarity to reach out for help. Didn't know what was the right way of asking for things. It's hard to build a rapport with people that way, unless, as you say, maybe there are spaces and ways and processes to do that the company lets you
Hmm.
know that this is the right way. I think
Yeah.
it depends a lot on the environment you're in, but for new hires, for example, it's something as a manager, as a leader, you have to pay attention to, because otherwise it doesn't come for free anymore, as you said.
You might have to schedule one-on-ones for that person across the
Yeah,
team, maybe have some social time, have some like Slack integrations that let you know people or some like random pairings. But yeah, you don't get the, oh, I met them in the kitchen and we chatted, even though I work in
yeah,
marketing and they're in engineering.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You don't have a kitchen designed for that anymore.
So
Coffee machine corner
yeah.
that is
We did,
there to
yeah.
facilitate that.
We tried to use Slack huddles for that, but it didn't quite work out.
As a coffee machine.
Yeah, it's just, oh, come hang out at this time to have just audio only huddles, but it's hard.
Yeah,
People also really the focus time working remotely.
yeah,
Like the idea that we were in open offices and people could just come up and talk to you is also like it's very anxiety inducing for me right
yeah.
now. I'm like, oh no, unless I have a call scheduled, like I expect that I have focus time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As for intentional ceremonies, about this, we try to create some. I think at the beginning you have to win some awkwardness of people thinking, okay, but this is strange that we have maybe a meeting just to chit chat, to
Mhm.
small talk. But then I think if you hold on it, then I mean, it grows on people and it becomes a great thing. But at the beginning, it feels strange. It's not because it's not something you're used to, and people may feel so about that. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when it comes to another thing that I know we have talked about in the past together, even in our other chats, you have talked about this even from a more personal perspective. So I think there is a hustling that comes from the company culture, the team.
Mhm.
And then there is, let's say, another version of this that comes more from your mindset, let's say. And I can relate
Mhm.
with this personally because as long as I've been a founder of a startup, I work at long hours, I work in many weekends. It was never like an extreme thing, but I had my fair share of this. And I always thought this was because of the environment, because it was
Mm,
of what I had to do. I wouldn't necessarily enjoy doing this if I wasn't forced in a way to do this because of
mm,
survival of my company. But then I find myself as not today that I'm a writer, and in theory I could work much less and take my time to do things, struggling to take more time for myself because it's like my brain is wired in this way. And it's maybe I'm a hustler for life. I don't know if I know maybe this is something you have thought about. Is this something you felt in your life or during the
yeah.
various transitions?
Yeah, I don't I feel like I don't necessarily self-identify as a hustler, but I think it's also that but to be fair, I do feel uneasy if I'm not doing something, right? Like I
Me
feel
too.
like I need to be doing something productive. Or even when I think about hobbies, my brain automatically goes, how's that going to scale? Am I any good at it? Like, how am I going to monetize it? Which is just like ridiculous. It's just do something fun that you enjoy, right? People need space for those sorts of things. But yeah, I think there's definitely, even for someone like me who's not, oh, I really want to hustle and I really want to like go all in on something, there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. I think this is probably relatable to my audience and to you because we're like high, maybe not, even if I'm not like, oh, I am like an overachiever, right? Like we're high achieving
Yeah,
people who have gotten to where we are because we're doing stuff, we're achieving, there's
yeah,
accomplishment. And then you get to a point where you're what now? What do I want to do with my time? Or maybe you've gotten to the point where you're like, this is what I wanted, or but I'm still maybe not feeling fulfilled. And so what is it that I value and what is it that I want to spend my time doing? And I think for me, having kids definitely
hmm,
shifted my perspective a little bit because it's not sustainable to just be like going from thing to thing, right? Like you don't get a break at all. Like the weekends are with young kids are just like maybe more tiring than the work week. And so just I think seeing just how like depleted I was a few years ago really, yeah,
hmm,
really helped me redefine like, okay, what is it I want? I think another thing that is like a forced mindset shift is like all that hard work does not necessarily map to successful financial outcomes. If you look at the tech industry, it's yeah, like people who work hard hopefully get some reward, but in terms of successful exits, like crypto money, right? It's all a bit of a crapshoot, right? And
yeah, it
what
is.
area you're in, like who what VCs funded you, like it's all very like random. And so you could work 80 hours a week at a startup thinking, oh, I'm just going to grind for these few years because at the end of it, there's going to be this huge payout and I'm going to sacrifice my health and my family life because it's going to be worth it and then end up with nothing. That's a
Yeah.
very common, that's like a very common
It's the
experience
most
to
common
have.
experience. If you should take the numbers, it's probably the most common one. Yeah.
Exactly. And so what are you actually in control of? It's yeah, like for me, I especially a few years ago when it seemed like a lot of people were job hopping and it was, oh, why would you work for X amount of money when you could just switch jobs every 2 years and get a 50% raise every time? Maybe because I like the people I work with, or maybe because I like the team culture. You have to like once you're not chasing that like career climbing and the optimization of
Yeah.
financials. I think it's you're forced to think about, then what am I optimizing for? Because otherwise, it's just really hard because there's always going to be someone making 10x what you're making, and you don't know at all what's going on in their lives. But it's hard. I'm not a very comparative person, but I know it's hard, right? To be like, oh, why do they have $10 million and I don't? And yeah.
Yeah. I'm not, I get it completely. Something that I made peace with as a former founder is that it's not all because of your own skills, or you're not in control in when you get down to it, because there is always a big element of external factors, call it luck or timing or market or whatever. And when you accept this, there's this element of acceptance that you're not in control of things. You're in
Hmm.
control of some things, and of course your role is decisive, right? If it's not by for your skill and your grit, maybe you will not make it, but
Right.
it's not a sufficient condition for you to make it. And then maybe I'm a competitive person instead by nature, and but when you come to accept this, it was easier for me to stop comparing me with others, to stop thinking I didn't make it, this other guy made it. It's which I think it's just natural, but when you think it's not all on you, it's just a healthier way, I think, way of thinking. But it takes time. It's especially in startups. I think it's a very competitive
Yeah.
environment, very competitive culture. People measure themselves by funding, by all different stuff.
Yeah.
I think
I
it's
mean,
not easy. Hmm.
maybe I'd have a different perspective if I had gotten in and then had a hugely successful exit, had like life-changing money and never had to work again. But like, as someone who's been in the tech industry for a while and hasn't had that kind of exit, for me, it's very clear that I prioritize the journey. Like when
Yeah,
I choose to work somewhere, it's because I think I'll enjoy working there with these people and not necessarily, oh, I think this is obviously if it works out and we all become like rich at the end of it, great, but that's not a reason that I would join a company.
yeah. No, I agree. I think I don't have kids yet, so I can speak for that. But probably that is something, as you said, that changes your measure of success. Even what
Hmm.
you feel like your definition of achieving of achievement, right? You've been on
Hmm.
maybe an achiever your whole life about work achievements, and then
Hmm.
maybe I don't know if you think about your family time or time spent with your kids as achievements, maybe the same
Hmm.
way you thought about work before.
Yeah, yeah, definitely my priorities are different now. And absolutely the way that I think about work and the way that like what I need out of work now is not something that I think works for everyone. If you're like in your early 20s or you have no external responsibilities, you're super hungry, maybe you actually want work to fill up a lot more of your life. You want to find somewhere where everyone's working nights and weekends because that's the experience you want. And I think that's totally fine. But I think there needs to be space for people where work is a little bit more compartmentalized as well. And there's space for them to have other things going on in
Yeah.
their lives as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great angle when you mentioned the fact that younger people might just go for it, because I think the most important element is that you're intentional basically about the trade
Mhm.
and balance that you're getting. Because yes, you might be hungry, you might be early in your career, prioritize work, maybe there is nothing wrong about it, but this is something that you are intentional, you are choosing, and it doesn't feel like it is thrown upon you, rather than
Mhm.
being how you're structuring your life, or maybe it's the company culture that is imposing this kind of work on you.
Yeah.
uh, One of the things that I was thinking about all the Twitter situation, if you're a founder, if you're founding a company and you want to create this kind of culture, maybe of a lot of intensity, maybe you
Hmm.
hire for this kind of people, and you
Hmm.
can select the people who enjoy doing this, and it's easier, rather than you get into a company which is well established, thousands of people, doesn't have this kind of culture, you try to impose this on
Hmm.
people. So it's all about what people accept and what people want from their work.
But I don't think so. I think the important thing though is that I don't think you're necessarily going to get better work out of those people, right? Because if they're earlier in their career, I heard the analogy of a lot of times that early, often younger startup hustle is like you're just throwing spaghetti against the wall. You're just like, let's try this. And you have so many hours to churn through and you're not getting enough sleep. So you're just like doing busy work. Whereas
Yeah,
I think people who have more experience are a little bit less willing to grind like that.
yeah,
But they also don't need to because they've had the experience to be like, just do this. I'm just going to go in and do it correctly. So we're not like dealing with these fire drills from hacking together random bits
yeah.
and pieces for the next 3 years.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I also think there is an element to it about the maturity and the scale of your product, right? If you are a small startup, probably the nature of your incentives makes it that you get more leverage by throwing stuff at the wall and figuring out what sticks, because the
yeah.
downside is very little if you get something wrong. While if you have a service that goes out to hundreds of millions of people, you just don't have the kind of privilege. Probably the downside is much higher if you get something wrong rather than moving in a thoughtful way, incremental way.
But I think we've been talking about this divide of like companies who do this and companies who do this. I think at all companies, there's some mix of the type of
Yeah,
people. And I think for companies, what I would suggest is to really, and especially if you're in a leadership position, to really think about what you're rewarding and what you're incentivizing. Are you only calling out people who stay up on weekends to work over the weekend or put out a fire? But are you also rewarding the people who never have to put out a fire because their
yeah,
work is really robust? And like I think DevOps, like excellent DevOps teams always, people are like, I don't know what they do. So that's great. Like they're doing an excellent job. Then if your service is, if your users are scaling and you don't have any outages, that's not, I feel like the industry is very glamorizes like heroics and like kind of flashy stuff of, oh, I was up till 2 a.m. like
yeah,
figuring this out. But what about the person who just managed their time well and did everything during,
exactly.
regular
Yeah,
work hours?
yeah.
Like
That
they don't get the, I guess they don't get the recognition as much.
Yes, I think that's a classic fallacy. It's just
Mhm.
like the story, the famous story of the plane in World War One, that they came out with the bullets and they
Mm.
reinforced the part of the plane where they saw the bullet holes, but not the ones where there were not bullet holes. It's I agree. It's because I think this happens just because it is more visible. Probably it's more easy to see people who are out there putting out the fires and not the ones that worked to prevent the fires in the first place.
Mhm.
I don't have an easy answer for this, but of course, I think the culture is eventually what you reward and what you praise people for. So if you are rewarding putting out fires, and you do not create enough incentives to preventing fires in the first place, that's just what you get.
Yeah, and I think it's really a lot of times the like engineering leaders can play an important role in like raising the visibility of this more, I guess, less dramatic work, right? The important
Yes,
work that's
that's a
happening behind
glamorous
the
work.
scenes and figuring out how to bridge the gap between engineers and the rest of the company to, if you just describe, oh, this person built this service in this way, people are going to be like, I don't know, but I don't know, I don't know what that means. But trying to figure out ways or analogies or metaphors to like properly convey like the difficulty of what someone did, what might have happened if they hadn't done that, and really
Yes,
giving people some visibility and yeah.
yeah, no, absolutely. It's all on tech leader, engineering leaders to create the right culture and set of incentives for that. Not easy though, I
And in
understand.
promotions, right? Raises, all those sorts of things. That's also
Yeah,
very concrete incentives as well, not just public
practical
recognition.
ways of yes, absolutely. So another thing that I wanted to talk with you, one of the things that I like the most that you've written recently is this two-part series article about these whole categories of spaces, space that you wrote about, space not to be exhausted, space to do whatever, space to enjoy, and finally space for finding space for creativity. And I loved hearing about your journey, about how you found such space for yourself. I just wanted to hear your comments about this, how you came up with this categorization, this framework. I can call it a framework, and chat a bit about this.
Yeah, I it was interesting. I started writing it when I was in Japan, and so I had a little bit more space, and I hadn't really planned it out. I just started writing about like how I feel like my life is so much more spacious now than when my kids were younger. And I felt I was commuting into SF every day from Berkeley. And I just felt very like I didn't have any space to, yeah, like everything was like I was going to work and then I was coming home and then doing bedtime. And on the weekends, it was like really hands on. And yeah, the idea came to me as, oh, maybe there's some level that's or some level of hierarchy that needs to be satisfied before you can even think about the next level, like Maslow's hierarchy of
Yeah,
needs. And as I was like, let me just sketch it out. And as I was sketching it out, it became like a lot of things became more clear to me because I feel like writing is really important to me. In the past, I've done a lot of like crafting or just like I used to do a ton of pottery and like all these things that really disappeared from my life, and I was, like, confused. I'm like, "Am I just I don't wanna do those things anymore? Is it that I am not a creative person?" And I think I
mm,
realized, like, no, I those desires emerge, but first I need to have these other things, and it's
yeah,
hard to skip from like, I think one thing that I see, especially with parents and moms, is, like, they're in the first space, so the space is, like,
yeah,
space to be exhausted, right? They're completely depleted, and then suddenly maybe they have a day off work and then they just like, okay, how am I going to spend this time? How could like maybe I should finish that project I was working on, and there's just so much pressure to be productive with that time of, oh, I should go. I mean, for me I was like, oh, I should go check out Chat GPT or Mid Journey or like all these things that I feel like I should be doing, but I didn't really give myself space to I would give myself space to do this, but I'd feel bad about it to just
yeah,
watch Netflix or just read a book or just do whatever. And so I was like, okay, I think the next thing above space to not be exhausted, which is obviously around getting enough sleep, and I think that's a real challenge for folks, especially with young kids, like just getting enough sleep. And then once you have enough sleep, then if you have space, like you need some space to just almost waste, like to not feel like you need to be
yeah,
productive with it at all,
yeah,
because when you have this overwhelming pressure that you give yourself to be productive or efficient with that time, like you're not going to be, and then then you just feel bad about it. So then
yeah,
I realized once I had that, then I was like rediscovering what are the things I enjoy, also without the pressure of being productive or with creating anything. And
yeah,
if you can see some of like crochet stuffies in the background, I
yeah.
had this existential question of, is this even creative work?
Creative.
Because I didn't make the patterns. I was just like following the patterns to the stitch. And like after writing this, I was like, it doesn't matter if it was creative work or not. I enjoyed it and it gave me the space to then it was like part of the ladder to creating more space for writing, for doing things that I'm now putting out into the world. So
Yeah,
as a meta point, I feel spacious now, but I feel like with life events, like that may not always be the case. Even within a week or within a month, I feel like I can see, okay, now I'm really depleted. Like when we came back from Japan, I was like, oh, I'm super depleted. I'm jet lagged. And I had this moment where I was like, oh, I'm up in the middle of the night. Maybe I should write.
yeah,
And what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm wasting this time, like these few hours in
yes,
the middle of the night. I should write something. And but then I was like, "Oh no, like I am in the space to not be exhausted." And so I kind of just
yes,
let go of that and watch TV or something to just pass the time. And so I think it's a helpful framework. I've heard from other people it's helpful, but honestly, it's like helpful for me to remind myself like, okay, I can let go. If I'm like at this level, I can let go of these other things and just try to take care of myself and work my way back up.
yeah. No, it definitely resonates with me. I think that the lower you are in the level of the hierarchy, the harder it is to rationalize then that it is okay, to spend that time either to being exhausted or doing whatever. Because I really thought, about my hobbies, my passions, my things that I do without much expectation of an outcome of some kind. I play guitar, I drive sim racing, but as long as it is something that I enjoy or that is even creative in some way, but for example, playing guitar, I have an easier way justifying the fact that I'm spending
Mm,
time this way, right? Because it's a creative, there is a creative output of some kind, or it is something that I truly enjoy. So I can feel the why it is worth to do this. But it is harder to just spend time watching Netflix for a lot of time, or doing something that is completely useless. And sometimes I even feel the urge, if there is something, some hobby or something that I feel it is not, to tell you in your own words of the hierarchy, it is not something creative to turn it into something that has to have an objective or some
Yeah.
goal, because this way it becomes like official, and it turns into something that is worthwhile just because I have a goal for that, even if the goal it's of course meaningless. It really helped me to put things in boxes.
Yeah. This, yeah, I was reading this. I don't know if it's here, maybe it's upstairs, but I think it's 4,000 Weeks. Have you read that book?
Okay,
It's
no,
kind of
I
a
haven't.
time. I can send you the link, but it's like a time management. It sounds like it's about time management and productivity, but it's like an anti-time management and
Yeah.
productivity book. But it talks about how there's kind of the promise of, oh, technology will then create more leisure time for people, but it's in the opposite, at least in the US, where like people are working more than ever, even though the output is higher than it used to be.
Yeah.
And I think it was just, yeah, very interesting. Like one example he gave was like people are like so goal oriented that they don't just run for fun. They create these like goals for themselves. Oh, I'm going to train for this 10K. I'm going to train for this half marathon. And that kind of creates this forcing function where they have to then
Yes.
run these things, which
Yes.
is how literally I read that. And I was like, oh, that is literally how I forced myself to try to run, even though I don't enjoy running. I'm like, maybe if I just don't enjoy running, then I should just not run, or find some way to enjoy running, right? Rather than like making myself run specific distances 3 times a week to work towards this goal and then be like, I achieved the goal. And then once there's no goal,
Yes.
then like I don't run at all.
That's me. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So just
No, I mean,
having space to find things we
uh,
enjoy and do them
I, te-
just for the
I,
sake of
te-
doing them.
yes, I'm getting better at this,
Mhm.
but I still do this. Like you said that to in order to run, you set goals for running, and I do the
Mhm.
same. Even I think the worst thing I've done with this ever is I started doing some sim racing, so driving games online. With there is a ranking, there are championships, and at some point I set a goal for getting to some level. For this is a game, I should just enjoy doing this. Instead, I set
Yeah.
a numeric goal, and in my head, I even think it's numeric, it's a key result. Luca, it's then I read this out loud, and I thought it was the worst thing I have had ever done for my life, probably. But yes, that it is what it is. But I think your point about people working more and more, even if there is more technology, is very interesting, and also speaks to those who think AI will steal your job or people will just be laid off. I think companies will just do more with people will be more productive, and companies will do more with them as long as the value is there. It's not like you hire people to get back to the previous level of output. I think you will keep people and people will do more. And
Yeah.
it's
Capitalism does not work with everyone just sitting around doing nothing. So I think there's going to be jobs. I guess the
yeah.
nature of the jobs might change. But the sim racing thing made me think of my friend who she was describing she's been trying to like decompress and more chill activities. So she started playing this like iPad game called like Cats and Soup or something, where you just literally like click on cats and then they like make soup and then you
Awesome.
serve it. And but she's even then, I'm like trying to upgrade the cats so that the soup they make is like the most expensive, like make the most money off of these cats. And just, yeah, it's pretty scary how outcome driven we've become.
Yeah, I think because we want to put any all of these activities into the boxes of things that are outcome driven, and because we do not easily accept that there are these other boxes, the space to enjoy, the space to do whatever, that are like requirements to get to the ones that are actually creative outputs, and we should accept that. I don't
Yeah.
know where I am in this acceptance journey, but now that I'm aware that there is this model, this framework that I should pay attention to, I feel I can get better to it.
Yeah, it was funny. I After I published that, what you were saying before, like people when we were chatting before, like sometimes you don't really know the impact of the stuff you put out there because people just read it and then they don't really tell you anything. But a friend of mine, she messaged me and she's like, "Oh, I loved your recent post about the framework." And she was like, "I just took a nap. And right before I took the nap, I said, Jean told me I have to." That's what I told myself, Jean told me I have to take a nap. That's like highest priority right now. I'm like, this is great. If people are out there getting more rest, like my job is done.
Yes, space to do what Jean does. Well, yes, if it works, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. But I think there is a mapping to work as well, right? Like we were talking
Yeah.
about engineering output, like you are not going to get good work out of engineers if
Mm.
they're not sleeping well. And also, like, you can't just give them, I guess you can, but you're also maybe not going to get the best work out of engineers if you just, here is the stack ranked list of priorities, do them in exact order. You need to have space for people to be like, oh, I found this thing that I wanted to refactor and I did it because it was
Yes.
fun. Or, oh, I found this other thing that's not a high priority, but we might need it down the line. And I fit it in when I was waiting for reviews on this other thing. We're not machines that can just go through each thing
Yeah.
in priority order. And so if you have, I always try to have a bunch of things that people can pick up that are like important, but
Yeah.
if you feel drawn to it, pick it up because I think if people are working on things that make them happy, then that'll go back into the high priority work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes me think about a previous interview that I ran a few weeks ago with Andrew, which was one of the first engineers at Dropbox. And he told me that
Mm.
they did, for example, these hack weeks, like twice a year,
Mhm.
where people were free to create any project about Dropbox, internal or what. It was totally open ended, totally self directed with no expectation. So it was in a way space to do
Space to
whatever.
do
Okay.
whatever, yeah.
Yes, exactly. But
Mhm.
what happened is that during these weeks, people often addressed things that were bothering them the most during their
Mhm.
day, pieces of technical debt that were making them spend a lot of time day by day. And some of the most interesting internal projects and tooling and free internal
Mhm.
frameworks came out of these weeks because top
Mhm.
of people's mind were things that were big bottlenecks. And this was a huge success, but not in the way that the leadership thought it would be. It's not, we're not
Mhm.
like moonshots or completely different projects, but were still very useful. And I think seeing this from the lens of the hierarchy, if you leaving some space for that makes even the other spaces better.
Yeah. And hack weeks for sure, but Google famously had, I don't know if they still have, probably not, but had the 20%
Yeah.
time, spend 20% time on whatever. And I think there's both, yes, that's a perk, right? Like people get to have space to do things that are not necessarily like the highest priority on
Yeah.
their project. But yeah, as you said, those some of those became major product lines for Google. So
Yes.
yeah, I think it just speaks to, yeah, people are not, engineers are not machines, and you have to look at
Surprisingly.
the health of the whole individual. Yeah, I did this panel that was like, why to treat your developer like human beings? I'm like, because they are? I don't know. Is this a real question?
Yeah. I have an idea. It's very innovative. Yeah. No, I totally agree. Sometimes it is trivial in hindsight, but still looks counterintuitive before you start doing things in a way.
Yeah.
I agree.
But
Since
I
we are
think it's
almost all,
important. I think it's important though, because people, and I think a lot of times companies don't really understand this nuance. So they're like, oh, if we give people time to do this stuff, we're going to get less. Right. To them, it's, oh, we can't afford that right now. Oh, let's worry about that stuff when we are feeling more spacious. Or, but I don't think it's an either or. I think you invest in people in this way, you get better results. So,
yeah, I think it all comes down to trusting people, treating them as adults, and not thinking you're in the back of your mind that if you leave them alone, they will trick you and not working all the time.
right. Yeah. So if you give people unlimited sick days, they're going to lie about being sick to just like
they, they will
go
be
do
always
what, right?
sick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it will just not happen. Most people are decent human beings. Might be surprising, but it is what it is. Yeah, I'm mindful that we are almost out of time. So I wanted to wrap up by asking you more about your newsletter. What are your plans for it? So for people who are watching this, it is called Tech and Tea. There you will find the links in the below the recording. It is on Substack. I'm a big fan, but Jean, you tell us also what are your plans for this?
I'm not a very like planning type person, but I guess right now I'm writing maybe 2 to 3 times a month. I'm trying to keep it really something that I feel is relevant to me and like what I'm going through, because I found that a lot of times sharing that is also what other people are going through. And just, yeah, I think a lot of these topics around parenthood, partnership, career, all these are very relevant of just like how do you navigate all of life stuff? What else am I planning for it?
No, I didn't mean big plans.
I'm trying not to put too much pressure on it, 'cause I turned on paid subscriptions and then I realized I was like, "Oh my God, now I have to write more. I have to like have a structure." And I'm trying to like let go of that because I feel like it needs to be somewhere in the space to enjoy and space to create for me to continue to want to do it. And I really do love it right now. It's a really important part of my life. But I could see it becoming like, oh, I have to do it, and then it becomes a chore. So I'm trying to like intentionally let go of that. And I think the right people will find the newsletter, and it may not be right for some people, but I think it'll speak to the right people.
That's the right answer. Mine was a trick question. I wanted to see if you would answer me with goals, numeric things,
Yeah,
and all.
exactly. Here's my AR goal. I'm tracking exactly right to hit it for next year.
Yes, if you were really living by your principles or it was all a lie.
Oh,
Yes.
phew, glad I passed.
Yeah. So, Jean, thank you so much for this chat. I really enjoyed it. And for all of those who are watching, we will post it in the community and we will continue the conversation there in the comments and also create a dedicated newsletter edition for this. So, thank you again, Jean, for being with us.
Thanks, Luca.